excited to be here, standing between you and lunch. So I will talk as quickly as possible. It's a rough slot, but it's good. Someone's got to do it. And we're going to be talking a little bit about incident response. And as Nathan said, my name is Matty Stratton. I'm a DevOps advocate, and I like to call myself a thought validator instead of a thought leader. So you can tell me your thoughts, and I will tell you they're okay. And I work for a company called PagerDuty. We've got a booth. We can talk about stuff, and that's about as much as I'm going to talk about PagerDuty, except for that I will be telling you some of the ways that we do things at PagerDuty when it comes to incident response. And from a background perspective, again, I'm a DevOps advocate for PagerDuty. Nathan mentioned my podcast, Arrested DevOps, so I'm glad to hear we've got some fans in the audience. I've got some stickers. We got some stickers at the PagerDuty booth. I'm an organizer of DevOps Days Chicago. If you're interested in making a long trip to the Windy City, our CFP is open, so we'd love to see you there. I'm one of the organizers of DevOps Days globally, and back when I did have a car, that was my registration tag, so I actually do buy into this DevOps thing a little bit, I guess you could say. So, who's been on one of those phone calls when you're trying to troubleshoot an issue, when something's going wrong, and all you're trying to do is problem solve with your fellow humans? People have been in those scenarios, right? Okay, right? Who really enjoy that experience and wants to do it all the time, right? So incidents can be really tough and really stressful, but there's ways to make them much, much less so. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. So first of all, what exactly is an incident? We talk about incidents all the time, but we can't really respond to an incident until we've defined what an incident is. We need to define what it is. If you're not sure whether something is an incident, you don't know whether or not to respond to it. So it's critical that you have a specific definition of an incident for your organization. So the thing is, there's no right or wrong answer to this. There's no right or wrong version. There's no magic sauce. But you have to have one. And it needs to be clear, memorable, and widely shared. This is PagerDuty's definition of an incident. Yours might be different, and that is okay. I just wanted to give you an idea of the kind of definition that can get you started. So you want your definition to be simple, shouldn't be any more than a sentence, and it needs to be easily understood by everyone. So for us at PagerDuty, we say it's an unplanned disruption or degradation of service that is actively affecting customers' ability to use the product. Now this is kind of a broad definition. A typo technically fits this definition, as does a full outage of the entire site. Those are very different scenarios. So we have something else too. And this is when we start talking about the idea of a major incident. So major incidents for us, generally they fall into two different types of ways of defining a major incident. It can be either a high severity incident, which has to do with the number of customers affected, the number of services affected. But usually a major incident is one that requires coordinated response across multiple teams. So at PagerDuty, we've got multiple services that make up our application and make up the service that you know and love. And all of those different services have their own on-call rotation and are notified, whoever's on call for that particular event processing service or user registration service or any of those different services, they get called when something is automatically escalated. Now, what can happen though is oftentimes an incident is not just about one service, right? Multiple things, there's multiple contributing factors. And those are things when we consider those major incidents, and we're gonna be talking about this idea of major incident response. Now, a little bit of background about why this stuff matters. So we commissioned a study across over 10,000 companies, over 100 different segments. So see, JFrog, we can do surveys too. This was 50,000 responders, and across these 50,000 responders, during the time of this survey, they received a total of 760 million notifications. And here's some of the things we found about that. 60 million of them occurred during dinner hours. 82 million were during the evening. Then you had 250 million notifications, that's 250 million, happened during sleeping hours. And 122 million notifications happened on weekends. You're seeing a pattern here of terribleness, right? So what ended up happening is there was 750,000 nights had sleep interrupting notifications. This is common, okay? Now, What you're saying is you're like, okay, I understand this is terrible, but why does this really matter? Here's why it matters. I always forget about that last bullet. We also did a survey across incident responders who had left their job in the last 18 months. And we wanted to know why. What were the meaningful metrics? What caused people to look for a new job? Now, you might think it was they went somewhere else for more money. Now, sometimes people do that. How many people have heard the phrase, you don't quit your job, you quit your manager? Okay, well that's true, but that wasn't the most meaningful metric on attrition either. The things that we found were the most meaningful, the numbers that mattered, that caused incident responders to look for another job and leave their current role were the number of days when their work and life were interrupted, the number of days when they were woken overnight, and the number of weekend days interrupted. Now, this doesn't mean that just because this happens, someone's going to quit their job. This is going to happen. But there were numbers that we saw that when it hit a certain threshold, people said, time to find something else to do. Why does this matter? Well, there's two reasons it matters. Why do we want to keep people? Well, number one, we want to treat our people well. We want to continue to work with good people. We enjoy our coworkers, blah, blah, blah. Here's the other reason. On average, in the States, it costs an average of $350,000 to replace an engineer. It's much cheaper, no matter where you are, it's much cheaper to keep the people that you have than to lose them. So we've heard talk about charity majors before, so we're gonna have another little fan party for Mipsy Tipsy. And like she says, on-call sucks and enjoy your life. I know this, bored now, right? Okay, great, Matty. You told me how much on-call is awful. But what can we do, right? It's a fact of life. We're not gonna get rid of on-call. You know, even if we go to the wonderful serverless magical world, we still are managing a system, right? There's still things that we have to care about. On-call is a fact of life for anyone who cares about developing high-quality software. So how can we make it not suck? That's what we're gonna talk about. Now, my jam is I like to take self-help books and turn them into a metaphor for DevOps. Some former things I've had was the 5 love languages of DevOps was a popular talk. And this one I'm going to talk about a book called The 4 Agreements. Now, there's a book by Don Miguel Ruiz, and it's a code of personal conduct based on ancient Toltec wisdom, which helps remove these kind of self-limiting structures and beliefs. So, and it's based upon these idea of these 4 agreements. So each of these 4 agreements helps us understand a more mature, effective, and humane approach to, guess what? Incident response. When I read this book, I said, this sounds an awful lot like good ways to respond to incidents. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about how each of these agreements can be a modality for incident response, and then using these agreements, they're easy to remember, and they kind of help us understand these modern approaches to resolving incidents as effectively as possible and help reduce burnout. So the 4 agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally. That one's really hard for me. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. So these are great ways to live your life. They're also great ways to respond to incidents within your system and your software. So we're gonna build through each of these, take each of these as a metaphor, and then understand some things about how we can improve our incident response. So number 1, be impeccable with your word. Some of the things to keep up in mind around that. So one thing is when we think about how we trigger our incident response process at PagerDuty, for example, we do it, it's possible to be done with a chat command, right? Anybody who happens to just see that there's something going wrong can just run this command. And this starts off our incident command process, our major incident. So sometimes it's automated. There are certain triggers within our metrics, within our monitoring systems that will trigger a major incident. But by the same token, I just sort of want to demonstrate that you can do it however you want. Now, I'm not saying you have to do it in a chat command. You don't necessarily have to do it the way we do it. You can do it however you want. You can have an air horn, a flashing light, have a mariachi band that comes around, and that's what triggers it. But you have some way to do it manually. Now, the point is you want some way to trigger your incident response that is fast, easy, and is available to everyone. Anyone can do it. the cleaning staff that's walking past an information display that shows things are going pear-shaped, they should be able to trigger incident response. We don't want to have to sit and figure out if things require response, because by the time we do, they most definitely will. So, it's important to have systems that can trigger incident response, but any human in your organization needs to be able to do it. And there's a little bit of a trick around this, is you need to celebrate when this happens. So this came up a little bit in Jennifer's talk when she talked about celebrating failure. It needs to be okay to trigger an incident response that doesn't actually turn out to be an incident. People need to not be penalized for that. Guess what's the worst thing that happens if you trigger incident response on something that turned out to not be wrong? You got to practice doing incident response, and now you're better at it. So it's okay to trigger an incident response. Similarly, don't litigate severity during a call. And what do I mean when I say don't litigate severity? So when we think about severity, maybe you call them P1, P2, P3, Sev1, Sev2, Sev0, whatever you call them. We have different ways of classifying how bad an incident is. Now, what this means when I say don't litigate it during a call, this means we don't discuss the incident severity during the call, right? If we can't decide between two, we always assume it's the higher severity and we move on. We used to, now again, what I'm going to tell you about how we do things in PagerDuty, these beautiful ideas did not spring from our foreheads as the geniuses that we are. These all came from doing things the wrong way, right? So this used to be a common practice when we would come in and say like, oh, is this really a Sev1? Is it really a Sev2? And then what ends up happening, first of all, is if you're arguing, if it's a Sev2 and you're arguing about whether or not it's going to turn into a Sev1 by the time you do something about it. And an important thing to remember is that the only thing that matters during incident response is restoring service. So anything you do during your incident call that is not about restoring service is a waste of time. Back to when I talked about how it was okay to trigger incident response. So I talk about this idea of not litigating severity quite a bit. And it happens in a lot of my talks. I'll talk to user groups, I'll talk to customers. And how many people have the challenge, have this happen on their incident calls when you have arguments about whether it's a Sev1 or a Sev2? It's okay if it happens, I'm not judging you, okay. So usually what happens when people tell me they have this problem, and I turn around and ask the question, I say, how does your CIO measure effectiveness of your team? Well, how many Sev1s did we have this month? So the thing is, we need to use our metrics. I'd like to say use your metrics for good, not for evil. And what that means is it's important to measure. I want to know how many Sev1s and Sev2s we had during this month, but I never want to use that as a measure of human performance. That should not be how I'm determining whether or not your team is doing a good job or not. It's something we want to know, but here's what's going to happen. If you are measured about whether or not your team is doing a good job by how many Sev1s, you become subject matter experts in arguing that it's not a Sev1. That doesn't help anybody. So one of the things that can really help around this is notifying your stakeholders, keeping them in the loop. Because naturally, if the only insight that my stakeholders have is that we have a Sev1 and we had X amount, guess how they're going to understand our effectiveness? So it's really important to keep stakeholders involved in the process and giving them a way to stay up to date. So at PagerDuty, we have a separate Slack room that's just for incident updates. It's less noisy than our main response room, and we give succinct updates to folks who want it, right? This lets execs stay in the loop and ask questions without affecting the main response. In our process, we have someone called an internal liaison during an incident, and they're responsible for monitoring and updating that channel. What this allows us to do is keep the channel of communication for the actual incident responders separate from the people who just want to know what's going on. Because how many times have you been on a call when every 5 minutes someone jumps on and says, please give me a status update, and now everything comes to a crashing halt while we update the executive of the moment who wants to know what's going on. So if you have a process to keep your stakeholders updated, they're not going to be coming in and asking these questions and slowing things down. So when we think about being impeccable with your word, remember, this means anyone can trigger incident response, don't litigate severity, and notify your stakeholders. This is how you're impeccable with your word in incident response. Next agreement, don't take it personally. Now, like I said, this is one I have a hard time with in real life, but I find it to be incredibly effective and incredibly important during incident response. And here's one of the places that this starts. Once an incident is triggered, we have to switch our mode of thinking. We need to make this mentality shift. So we want a distinction between normal operations and there's an incident in progress. We're switching decision-making maybe from what we might call peacetime to wartime, which is moving from day-to-day operations to actually defending the business. If you don't like the military metaphors, maybe you just call it normal and emergency. Or you might call it okay and not okay. The thing that matters is making a mental shift. During an incident, remember, the most important thing is restoring service. So things change. Our modes of communication change. Our appetite for risk. Our need to find the best solution versus the pragmatic solution. So we're making a mental shift between the two. Again, during an incident, a lot of things change. Communication changes a lot. And this doesn't mean that this is licensed to be a jerk, right? But we're focusing on our goal, which is to handle the situation in a way that limits damage and reduces recovery time and costs. We base our process on something called the US system of NIMS, the National Incident Management System, but there's many similar systems all over the world. So there's the Australasian Inter-Service Incident Management System, so AIMS would be the one around here. The thing that's really nice about the UK system is they have a role called the Gold Commander, which sounds like a Bond villain, which is kind of cool. But when we developed this process at PagerDuty, we took it based upon good practices that first responders use all around the world. So we didn't invent this ourselves. There's a great book available from the US FEMA website called Comparative Emergency Management, Understanding Disaster Policies, Organizations, and Initiatives from Around the World. I did not memorize that. If you're interested in learning more about the systems in use, it talks about systems across about 30 different countries. The idea behind this is that we did not invent this. It's based upon good practice. And one of those practices includes something called an incident commander. So at the top of our process, we have someone called an incident commander. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the IC. So the incident commander has the role to delegate and coordinate. They make decisions. They are the single source of truth during an incident, and they are the ones in charge. They make all the decisions, and no action should be performed unless the incident commander has said so. Incident commanders are not resolvers. So the incident commander is not the one who's logging onto servers and looking at logs and restarting services. In US fire departments, incident commanders wear a white helmet. And they have a saying that says, if you see someone wearing a white helmet, pick up a wrench, take it away from them and hit them over the head with it. Because you're supposed to be focusing on making decisions. Do not surprise them with this on their first incident call. This may have happened when our current CEO joined PagerDuty, and she didn't know, and had a scenario, and the incident commander, who was a regular individual contributor, had to pull rank, and then that was explained later how that works. But remember, don't take it personally, right? The incident commander is in charge at that time. And the incident commander, remember, is not a job title, it's a role. This is someone who is on call for being the IC, who happened to be the person who got called when this incident happened. So don't take them being in charge personally. And sometimes you have to help people understand this new way of working, and it can be really tricky, especially with your executives. So this brings into this idea that we sometimes call executive swoop. So you might run into this is my Darth Vader version of this, but some real world versions where executive swoop comes in when an executive gets on the call and says, I want this incident resolved within the next 10 minutes. Well, that's super demotivating because that's implying that everyone's not already working as hard as they possibly could. But thank you, executive, for coming in and motivating us and telling us to work harder. Now we clearly will get it done. And the other thing is oftentimes an executive might jump on the call and start trying to take over, start giving suggestions, barking orders, saying, don't listen to the incident commander, listen to me. Now, when the executive is coming in and trying to take over, dealing with that is quite simple. Let them take over. You say, are you taking command of the call? 9 times out of 10, they will say nothing, or they will say no. If they say yes, great, now you're done. Now your executive is the new incident commander. But most of the time, they won't say anything and you can move along. Because this is giving an opportunity to remind this executive who is trying to do the best thing for the business that we do have a process and we want to focus on it. Now again, remember that some of these things can be pretty demotivating. So when this happens, when these demotivating things happen, stay professional, don't take it personally. You can say things like, as incident commander, like, we are in the middle of resolving an incident, please hold your comments until the end. Or direct them to the appropriate communication channel or liaison. Or one of the things that happens oftentimes during a call is you'll get I need a list of all the affected customers, right? And then the answer to that is we can either provide that list or we can resolve the incident. Right now our priority is resolving the incident. What you're doing there is you're just gently reminding the people involved that we have a process, but again, not to reiterate too much, don't take it personally. This is just what happens, right? So to remember, we want to have our switch in our mindset. The incident commander has the highest authority. The incident commander is not a resolver. And one thing I didn't mention about that is sometimes what happens if the incident commander is the best person to properly resolve the incident? What you do there is you hand off command to somebody else. As the great Ron Swanson of Parks and Rec is fond of saying, never half-ass 2 jobs, whole-ass 1 job. So you can't do 2 things. And then watch out for executive swoop. The third agreement is don't make assumptions. I really like this one. We have to begin with certain assumptions. Let's assume that I am right and you are wrong. So let's take a quick example to show what I mean. I propose that this background is blue. Does everyone agree? Okay, this could take forever, right? So it takes us a long time to reach distributed consensus. We can be there forever when we're trying to make a decision on a call, trying to agree on the proposed actions. So we try this a different way. I propose that this background is blue. Are there any strong objections? Hearing none, the background is blue. Let us proceed. See how that was different? So one of the most essential terms in your toolkit as an incident commander is the phrase, is there any strong objection? When we're doing this, we're optimizing for the 99%. Also, this prevents the hindsight effect, which is, well, I knew that wouldn't work. Okay, we're giving the opportunity. But by using the phrase, any strong objection, we are reiterating that we are not looking for the most perfect solution. Again, during an incident, our mindset has shifted. So we're not looking for the most polished solution. We're looking for the solution that restores service. And we will talk about it later in the postmortem about what our remediation actions might be to make everything as super delightful as possible. Another one is avoiding jargon. This is really, really hard for us to do in tech. We love us some jargon and some 3-letter acronyms and some all that good stuff. So for example, I could say, let's get the IC on the RC and get some BLTs for all the SMEs. So this adds a huge amount of cognitive overload because you have to figure out what all those acronyms meant. So even if you knew what they meant, you're doing a translation function in your head. It also makes newcomers feel very excluded. So you want to favor clear communication over concise communication. Doesn't mean that you have to explain everything ad nauseum over and over again, but we want to be clear. And now it's time to actually assign some tasks. We've made some decisions. Now it's time to assign some tasks to actually help resolve the incident. We're going to tell our subject matter experts the things they need to do. So how do we do this as an incident commander? So a couple of critical items here. We want to make sure tasks are assigned to specific people, and they need to be time-boxed. And you definitely need to make sure that they're acknowledged. So we want to avoid something called the bystander effect, which is basically if I don't assign something to a specific if everyone owns it, no one does. Or if I say, can someone go do this? So an example of properly assigning things, this is a little more verbose than saying, can someone, but I might say, Rachel, I'd like you to investigate the increased latency, try to find the cause, I will come back to you in 5 minutes. And Rachel says, understood. So a couple key things happened there. One, I assigned it to a person, not to can someone. I said, Rachel, I would like you to do this, and I'm gonna check back with you within this certain amount of time. And I wait to make sure that it's been acknowledged. So that way I know that the person that it was assigned to understands what was asked and won't be surprised 5 minutes from now when I come back and say, hey, what's going on with the latency? So this is when we talk about not making assumptions. So consensus is hard. Assuming that everyone is coming along with you. Getting distributed consensus is hard. So use tricks like, is there any strong objection? Clear is better than concise. Don't assume that everybody knows all the terms and jargon that you use, and especially when you're talking about multiple teams being involved. Assign tasks to a specific person and make sure you time box them. One thing about time boxing is, now let's say what happens when it's 5 minutes from now and I go back to Rachel and I say, what's going on with the latency, and she needs some more time. Do I say, I'm gonna come back to you again in 5 minutes? Not really. I'm gonna at that point say, how much more time do you need? So we start with an initial time boxing, but then if the subject matter expert needs more time, we let them say how much time they need, because otherwise we just get into this every 5 minute kind of loop, and that's very wasteful of time. And the final agreement is always do your best. So what does this mean when it comes to incident response? So this is a little bit of a controversial statement. I guess we all get to have our one controversial statement we make on the stage. It is better to make the wrong decision than to make no decision at all. What do we mean about that? Making the wrong decision provides you with more information. If you make no decision, we don't know any more than we knew before. We get stuck in analysis paralysis. Remember when we said we're making a mentality shift during an incident? This means it's okay to make the wrong decision because we have learned from that. It's provided us more information. Does that mean making reckless decisions is a good idea? No. It's just saying it's better to not feel like we have to optimize and analyze every single possible thing that could be the outcome of that. I like to say rally fast, disband faster. So how many people have ever been on an incident call with 100 people? Fortunate for most of you who didn't have to raise your hand. I've worked in large financial institutions most of my career, so it's pretty much every single one I've ever been on. And of those 100, maybe 3 people are actually doing any work during the incident, which means we now have 97 people sitting there doing nothing except getting really, really pissed off because they're waiting for someone else to do some work. So the way that under common incident management practices, let's bring everybody on the call who might have an opinion about this, so that way we know we've got them and we don't waste any time. This is really expensive. Let's think about those 100 people. Let's think about that they probably cost, let's say they cost $125 an hour. That is a lot of money per hour to do nothing. It's also expensive in terms of effort because these are people that are not able to be doing other work, and it's really stressful for everybody involved. So the thing to remember is, yes, rally people as if you think they have something to contribute, get them on the call. Get them on the call as quickly as you can. But as soon as you know they aren't actively participating in the resolution, it's okay to let them drop. It can be opt-in. You can say, look, you know what? I only need the DBREs on the call right now. If you're not a DBRE, feel free to drop. Keep your phone on. I might call you. You can always get them back. And guess what? It doesn't take that long to get people back on the call. Do responders get tired? Do incident commanders get tired? Of course they do. We're humans. And sometimes incidents last more than a few minutes. It'd be nice if they didn't, but sometimes they can last hours and hours and may even span days. So handovers are highly encouraged. And the good thing is, handovers are really easy to do. You bring the new person in to shadow for a bit. So maybe if I'm bringing a new incident commander, I'll have them join the call, have them watch a Slack room. I may communicate with them in a private DM to kind of bring them up to speed to what's going on. And then when they're ready to take over, all they do is simply introduce themselves and say, hey, I'm Matty, I am now the incident commander. Now everybody knows what's going on. Same thing for subject matter experts, which may say, hey, I'm Matty, I am now taking over as DBRE. Okay, cool, we know. You will never hear me say, I'm Matty, I'm taking over as DBRE because I'm really not good at databases. So that's the only time you'll ever hear those words in that order put together. So let's talk about postmortems for a little bit. And Jennifer did a beautiful, beautiful job of introducing this idea and this topic earlier, so I may be beating a dead horse. Oh, come on, that was funny. So when we think about postmortems, a couple of things that I want to maybe expand upon is not only should they be blameless, so that was a really important thing, and I'm not gonna go too deep into the need for blameless culture, because again, we already heard about that this morning. So that's great, so that's gonna steal back a couple minutes, it's gonna get us to lunch a little bit faster. But I do want to have one thing to kind of reiterate around that is there's a great phrase that I like, which is you can't fire your way to reliability. So you may keep that one in mind. And then also, as Jennifer pointed out, the way I like to think about it is that if people are punished for making mistakes, it does not mean they will make fewer mistakes. It means they become subject matter experts in hiding their mistakes. So that's why blamelessness matters. We've heard a lot about that this morning, but let's talk about kind of the next level around our postmortems or post-incident reviews or after-action reports or whatever. I don't care what you call them. Just do them, right? But they're only useful if you actually learn from them. A lot of times we do postmortems and we have a little form and we fill it out and it's like doing our taxes. And we're like, okay, I did it, I was a good boy, give me my cookie. I filled out the postmortem form and now it is put off into some vault somewhere and no one will ever look at it again like the Ark of the Covenant, right? Now, wow, okay. Raiders, okay, I'm not that old, guys. It is definitely right before lunch. I call that a write-only postmortem. And a write-only postmortem doesn't help anybody. It has to be a learning exercise. And the only way that we learn from these things is by sharing them and actually by telling them as stories. Good postmortems raise more questions than they answer. If the whole point of your postmortem is to answer questions that already have been asked, you aren't learning as much as by saying, what questions do I have? What questions have we learned? So John Allspaw talks about how there's this line, and I'm gonna mangle this, but we have up at the top, we've got the humans like us, and then beneath the line, we've got our systems. And we can't talk directly to our systems. We aren't in the matrix. We don't speak directly. We always have to speak to our systems, and they speak to us through abstractions. And the beautiful thing about incidents is these are the signals that come from an incident are our systems telling us things about themselves that we didn't know before. So we need to ask these questions in our postmortem. Review your process regularly, right? Because things change. Your organization changes, your system changes, the way you do things will always be changing. So this idea of continuous improvement, whether you're doing this quarterly, annually, whatever, make sure that these questions, that these things that are coming up and the way that you're approaching your incident management process is the right way for your organization the way it is today. For example, at PagerDuty, at a certain point, everyone got paged on a critical incident, like everybody in the whole company. That was fine when there were like 30 people that worked there, right? It doesn't work quite so well when you've got a much, much larger organization. So these things, what makes sense at a certain size will continually change as the prospects of your business change, the features of your business change. So continually look back at it. And then finally here, don't panic. So panicking elevates stress. It causes others to panic. And this ends up hurting your incident response a lot more. Now, it's okay to panic on the inside. We're only human. It's a natural reaction to panic in these sorts of situations, just a little bit. Everything about getting paged is designed to get your adrenaline flowing. Loud pager sounds, just don't show this panic, because this causes others to do it as well. So if you act calm, others will follow suit. Our incident response, when we're building our incident response process at PagerDuty, some of the folks trained with ex-firefighters to learn about incident response. And there was something they mentioned that I always think bears repeating. So firefighters would often come to a house fire, and the homeowner is panicking, right? Is sitting there going, oh my God, my house is burning down, I'm losing all my stuff, or whatever. And the firefighters say, calm down. This may be your first fire. It's not ours. So fire is not an emergency to the fire department. It is routine. So those with experience will stay calm, and that makes the difference between a chaotic incident and one that resolves smoothly. And there's a lot of things we can do to make fires routine for our quote-unquote fire department. One of the things is that, for example, we at PagerDuty, we exercise failure injection and game days through something we call Failure Fridays. So every Friday, we have a system that we will take down, and we go through it to test its resiliency. We run that like a real incident with an incident commander through our entire normal incident response process. And what this does is not only does it give us more chance to practice, it gives us this sort of muscle memory as an organization that incident response is just a thing that we do. It's not stressful, it's not crazy. We just deal with it, we just do it, we just practice it. So remember, always do your best. And what does that mean? It's better to make the wrong decision than no decision. Rally fast, disband faster. Handovers are encouraged. Useful postmortems. The word useful is very important there. It's also like why I like to say make sure your tests are useful. Just doing tests is not enough. They need to be useful. Just doing postmortems is not enough. They need to be useful. Review your process, and most importantly, don't panic. So if you'd like to review, these slides are available. I felt like I had to throw a QR code up there because it seems cool to do. But if you don't do the QR thing, my speaking page is at speaking.mattstratton.com. I have these slides are available there, as well as some other talks I've given on this topic, and because I love to talk about incident response. And speaking of that, I would love to hear your on-call stories later throughout the conference in the hallway track. You may find me maybe at the PagerDuty booth. If you don't, my colleagues would love to hear your on-call stories. The gnarlier, the better. We've all been there. And you can find me on the Twitters at Matt Stratton. And thank you very much. I appreciate it. And enjoy lunch.